Welcome back to Dark Night Scare. In today's video, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy encounters in Appalachia and camping. So, grab your headphones, turn down the lights and get ready, and please subscribe this channel and like this video. Thank you all. Now let's start. When I was 22, Nate and Ellis and I went camping in the Appalachian Mountains. We pictured it as a typical summer trip. We planned 3 nights off the grid, no phones, no people, just a section of trail in the Blue Ridge, giving us a solid reason to disappear for a while. We chose a location well away from the main paths, near a place called Holton in North Carolina. It wasn't anything special, just far enough out that we wouldn't hear cars or see another hiker. We discussed the trip for over a month, exchanging gear lists, arguing about whose tent was better. It had that whole vibe of getting back to nature, but honestly, I think we were just trying to hit the reset button. Life felt messy for each of us in our own ways, and a little self-imposed exile sounded perfect. The initial hike-in felt pretty standard. Early summer heat, dense trees, dusty boots. We began on a popular trail and saw a few day hikers, but once we took a turn onto a smaller side path, everything shifted. The sounds faded away. No more voices, no distant road noise, just that heavy, quiet kind of stillness you only find deep in the woods. We walked for roughly 5 hours before locating the spot. A small clearing, just big enough for 2 tents and a fire ring that someone had previously left behind. We dropped our packs, stretched our legs, and took in the surroundings. No sign of anyone else, no trash, no footprints, just thick woods enveloped in that strange, calm silence. We set up camp and started a small fire. That first night felt almost too good. We cooked, shared silly stories, roasted unnecessary marshmallows. Nate kept cracking jokes about cryptids and serial killers, which was his idea of fun. At one point, he said, "This is perfect. No one out here but us." And that stuck with me, the way he said it, like he was claiming the space. The following day passed without much happening. We hiked around the vicinity, checked out an overlook offering a sliver of mountain view, and refilled our water near a creek. By the time we returned to camp, we were tired in that satisfying way. Everything felt normal. However, during the second night, something felt off. It began while we were eating dinner, just the 3 of us by the fire, partially focused on our food, partially listening to the woods. That's when we heard it. It wasn't loud, just a faint snapping of twigs, but not the sound of a wild animal. This was rhythmic, like someone shifting their weight. Careful steps, not close, but not far either. Right at the edge, where the firelight ended and shadows began. Nate stood up with his flashlight and swept it around slowly and steadily. Nothing, just trees. Maybe a branch or 2 moving in a breeze, but no definite movement. He sat back down and said it was likely a deer or a raccoon, or maybe a particularly judgmental squirrel, he added, trying to keep things light. We laughed, but Mian Changdi. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, standing just beyond the firelight, watching. After dinner, I went about 40 FT into the trees to use the restroom. Still on edge, I stayed within sight of the camp. That's when I saw it. Another fire ring, almost identical to ours. Stones arranged neatly in a circle, just off to the side of a tree. But this one wasn't old or abandoned. The center was black with ash. Some of the wood scraps inside looked like they had recently burned. It hadn't been there before. I was certain of that. We'd walked the perimeter when we arrived. We would have seen it. I called Nate and Ellis over. They came with their lights, and we just stood there for a minute, staring at it in a strange silence. Ellis kept glancing between it and our camp, as if perhaps we were mistaken, but we weren't. None of us had made it, and it hadn't been there the day before. Ellis tried to brush it off, suggesting someone had probably come through before us, maybe had a fire earlier that day and left, but even he didn't sound convinced. The ash was too fresh. The stones were still warm when I touched one. We debated whether to move camp, but it was already dark. We were tired, and none of us really wanted to admit how unsettled we felt. Eventually, we just returned to our fire, not laughing this time, just staring into the flames as if they might offer an explanation. That night, I woke up suddenly. Not from a dream, just completely awake. It was quiet inside the tent, but outside I heard it. Slow footsteps, not dragging, not running, just the soft, deliberate crunch of leaves. They circled the tent once, then again. I didn't move. I just lay there perfectly still, holding my breath. My heart was pounding. Each step sounded closer, more confident, like whoever it was knew exactly where we were and didn't care if we heard them. I nudged Nate. He woke up quickly, probably felt the tension. His eyes met mine, then he heard it too. We didn't say a word, just stared at each other, listening as the steps circled us one final time and then stopped, right outside the flap. For a second, I swear I saw a shadow move across the thin nylon. Not clear, not definite, just enough to freeze every muscle in my body. We didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited. Then it was gone. The sound disappeared. No steps, no voices, just quiet. Somehow, I fell back asleep. I don't know how. Probably just from sheer stress. When morning arrived, I shot up the moment light hit the tent. Nate was already sitting up. We stepped outside and saw the boot prints immediately. Large ones, deep. Treads, not hiking boots. Heavier, thicker-soled work boots, perhaps. They had circled the tent exactly the way we'd heard, and they stopped perfectly centered, right in front of the flap. Ellis came out a few minutes later, saying he hadn't heard anything, but when he saw the tracks, his expression changed. He grew very quiet. None of us said it aloud, but we all thought the same thing. Someone had been watching us, standing mere feet away while we slept. We didn't eat breakfast. We packed up quickly. Nobody argued. Nobody joked. We just wanted to leave. The hike back felt longer somehow. The woods felt different. Every branch seemed like it could be hiding someone. Every gust of wind made me look over my shoulder. None of us spoke much. Then we came across something that made my stomach plummet. A tree right off the trail. Bark peeled back in wide, ugly cuts. Words carved into it. Not neatly, just deep and forceful. Stay another night. We stopped. Just stared. Nate muttered, "Nope." Ellis said nothing. He just kept walking. None of us took a picture. We didn't want proof. It felt wrong, like looking at it too long might invite something worse. We walked faster, no breaks, barely drank water. When we reached the trailhead, we didn't neatly stow the gear in the trunk. We just threw it in, slammed the doors, and drove off. No one spoke until we reached a gas station miles away. Nate finally broke the silence. "We're not telling anyone about this, and we didn't for a long time. I haven't been back to those mountains since." I held a job at a small trail center nestled along a section of the Appalachian Loop, primarily working the evening shifts. The work itself wasn't thrilling, but I found it acceptable enough. It was quiet, steady, peaceful. A kind of quiet only jobs in the forest can offer. My duties were straightforward. Lock up the center, confirm hikers had checked back in, and walk the nearby loop trails to check the posted maps. Essentially, just keep watch so nobody got lost as the sun went down behind the trees. I'd been doing this routine all summer. Same patterns, same paths, same people asking about trails or snack bar hours. I could have walked the entire ridge loop with my eyes closed and still known every turn in the gravel. That night was expected to be like all the others. Nothing unusual. I was wrapping up just before dusk. The sun had dipped low, and the sky was fading into that muddy blue where it's hard to tell if it's still evening or already night. I zipped my jacket, switched on my flashlight, and started the final sweep up the ridge trail. Usually, even on quiet shifts, I'd see someone finishing their hike, stretching on a bench, taking a photo at the overlook or adjusting boots. But that night, there was no one. No hikers, no distant voices, no signs anyone had been on the trail that day, other than the names I'd checked on the register. The trail felt empty, but not in a peaceful way. It was as if I'd just missed everyone by a few minutes, and the air hadn't quite settled yet. I dismissed the feeling and kept walking. The overlook was less than half a mile from the junction. I'd walked it 100 times. It curved gently uphill, hugging the ridge before opening up to a small rest area. A railing at waist height, a simple bench, a plaque pointing out the peaks. That evening, I could see the overlook ahead. Not far, maybe 30 or 40 steps. I figured I'd be there in under a minute, but I wasn't. I walked on, boots crunching gravel, flashlight beam sweeping the path. Same steady pace, but the overlook never got any closer. At first I figured I was just tired. Maybe the fading light was messing with my depth perception. So, I picked up speed, pumping my arms, breathing louder. Still nothing. The overlook stayed fixed, like it was tied to me. I could see it clearly, the bench, the plaque, but I couldn't reach it. I stopped walking, stared hard. My chest felt tight. I turned around, thinking I'd backtrack and reset. But behind me, the trail was smooth and unbroken. No junction, no fork. It had definitely been there earlier. I'd taken the lower path up, like always. Now though, there was nothing, just a single trail stretching back into the dark. I froze, trying to make sense of it. I took a few steps back, looking for markers. Nothing seemed different, but everything felt wrong. Then, suddenly, without any transition, I was at the overlook. One moment, I was halfway there. The next, my flashlight illuminated the plaque. The railing felt cold under my hand, and the view was wrong. Instead of rolling ridges fading into the valley, a trail was carved directly into the cliff face across from me. An exact copy of my path. Same curve, same width, same bend just ahead, but different. No railing, no bench, no plaque. Just a bare trail running parallel to mine, impossibly perched on the opposite cliff. I leaned closer, gripping the railing, trying to steady myself. It wasn't a reflection, not a trick of the light. It was solid, real, and wrong. Then I saw the footprints, stamped into the dirt of that other trail, perfectly spaced, marching forward. They were mine. Same tread pattern, same stride length, same direction. Fresh, crisp, no scuffing, no weathering. Just a clean line of boot prints heading deeper into the dark. My grip tightened. I counted them, compared the spacing. They weren't, just similar. They were identical, step for step. The exact same number I had taken just before the overlook seemed to have snapped me forward. I froze, heart hammering. For a moment, I thought if I blinked, I'd be over there, standing in those tracks looking back at myself. But I stayed where I was. I turned away. And when I looked back down the trail, the fork was there again. Two paths, one leading toward the cabin, one looping back to the center. Normal, ordinary, as if nothing had happened. My flashlight trembled. I didn't try to steady it. I headed straight for the returning path, fast. I wasn't exactly running, but I definitely wasn't strolling. Every muscle was coiled, ready to bolt. I kept my eyes fixed on the gravel, refusing to look up at the ridge where that other trail might still be. But even with my eyes down, I heard it. Not footsteps exactly, more like echoes. A delayed version of my own steps, just a half beat behind. Crunch, crunch, pause, crunch. My skin crawled. I kept going, pushing myself until I saw the glow of the cabin lights. I didn't trust they were real until I was close enough to read the number on the door. I swung it open, locked it Saturday against the wall, lungs burning as if I'd run miles. I stayed there until morning. I didn't leave until the sun was high, enough to burn the shadows from the trees. I told myself I must have dreamed it or misremembered. Maybe I was just exhausted. We were aiming for a 3-day escape. Just me, Jonah, and Marcos, 2 of my oldest friends. The plan was straightforward. Head out to the Appalachians equipped with decent gear, hike a bit, cook over a fire, eat well, and remind ourselves that life exists beyond meetings and deadlines. We'd been talking about it since early spring, sending each other links to gear we didn't really need, joking about who might forget the lighter. You know the drill, more talk than action mostly. But somehow this time, it actually materialized. The drive felt like the beginning of something. We left early on a Thursday, crammed into Jonah's old Subaru. It smelled faintly like coffee grounds and damp socks. The roads grew narrower as we climbed, winding back roads where the trees arched overhead, almost closing in. Cell signal vanished after the last gas station. Marcos joked it was too late to turn back. None of us laughed. We parked where the gravel ended and hiked in, perhaps an hour, maybe less. The trail was clearly marked at first, and we weren't seeking a remote spot, just quiet. We found a clearing about 15 minutes off the main path, wide enough for 2 tents, and featured a fire pit that was partially constructed. There was an odd ring of trees around it, a semicircle, as if something had pushed them outward long ago, and they hadn't grown back correctly. I remember standing in the middle, slowly turning around, and saying it looked like the place was waiting for us. Marcos tossed a pine cone at me and told me to stop being weird. We set up camp, secured the tents, gathered some wood, and managed to get the fire going without much trouble. It felt like we'd done something right. That first night was perfect. We cooked over the fire, just hot dogs and foil-wrapped veggies, but they tasted incredible. The air was crisp, not cold. Jonah passed around his ridiculous camping whiskey flask, and we all tried not to complain about our backs aching. The woods were calm, crickets, distant owls, the occasional rustle in the undergrowth that was probably just a raccoon. Around midnight, we went to sleep. Jonah snored. Marcos mumbled in his sleep. I drifted off, staring at the zipper on my tent door, which I'd left open slightly to let air in. I woke up to nothing. No sound, no wind, no hint of the fire, just a wall of silence. I unzipped my bag and crawled out slowly. The fire was still glowing, coals shifting gently. Everything looked untouched until I turned around. My tent was zipped shut, not flapping, not partially open, fully closed from the outside. That froze me. I hadn't zipped it. I was sure. I stood there barefoot on the dirt, waiting for some other explanation, a gust of wind, a prank. But there wasn't even a breeze. I crouched, unzipped it, checked inside. Nothing, just my belongings, untouched. I climbed back in and pulled the zipper up halfway. I didn't want to be fully enclosed after that. I didn't sleep much. The next morning I mentioned it casually over breakfast, instant coffee and trail bars. Jonah shrugged. Marcos looked at me a moment too long, as if he hadn't slept well either. We set out on a loop trail Jonah had mapped on his phone before service dropped. 5 miles. Minimal elevation change. At the first fork, the map indicated we should turn left, so we did. 20 minutes later, we found ourselves by a stream none of us remembered. The terrain didn't match the map. We laughed it off, figured we'd missed a turn, and backtracked, but the fork was gone where it should have been. The trail simply continued. No split, no sign another path had ever existed, like it had healed over while we were momentarily gone. That was when it really hit me. We tried to laugh, talked about trail erosion, old paths becoming overgrown. Marco suggested maybe we were misreading the map. We kept walking, but the forest seemed to look the same in every direction. The sameness started to feel intentional. By late afternoon, we were tired and irritable. When we made it back to the clearing, I felt it instantly. The trees were closer. The semicircle had shrunk, just a little, but noticeably. There was a pine tree split down the middle, shaped like a Y. I didn't remember it being there. It stood just beyond my tent, leaning slightly, as if watching. I pointed it out. Marco said I probably just hadn't noticed it before. Jonah stayed, quiet. We built a fire anyway. No one ate much. When I went to my tent that night, I stopped. The split pine was closer, less than 10 feet away, as if it had crept forward. I stared at it too long, waiting for it to move. That night was worse. I couldn't settle. I kept hearing tiny sounds like shifting pressure. Around 3 in the morning, the fabric of the tent pressed inward. Just once, a slow, deliberate lean. No footsteps, no breathing, just a presence. Then it stopped. I didn't move. I just kept my eyes open and waited for light. By morning, we were all on edge. No one admitted it, but nobody felt okay. We ate in silence, packed slowly, avoiding looking at the trees. We agreed without speaking to leave early. But getting out wasn't simple. We followed the same red blazes we'd used coming in. At first, it felt familiar. Then one marker pointed left and the next pointed right. We stood there staring, trying to guess which was more recent. Jonah chose left. We followed it for over an hour and ended up back at the clearing. It looked the same, but not quite. Our tents were gone, not collapsed, not torn, just gone. The fire pit was still there, but cold, as if it hadn't been touched in days. No one spoke. Finally, Marco said he thought he'd seen the split pine on the trail earlier. I didn't ask if he meant it had moved or if we had. I didn't want to know. I said I was done. Chose a downhill direction and started walking off trail. No markers, just forest. The others followed. We didn't talk. We pushed through brambles and low branches that felt unnaturally low. At one point, I swear I heard a whisper, but no one was near me. Eventually, the slope deposited us onto gravel, a cracked, forgotten road, but real. We stood there a long moment. Then we walked. No celebration, no relief, just silence and sore legs. The trees thinned, the hills opened. The air stopped feeling oppressive. We didn't talk on the drive back. Jonah turned on the radio. Marco stared out the window, making sure the trees weren't following. I've never gone back. It happened when I was 32. My friend Jonah had a cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. His family had owned it for years, though hardly anyone used it anymore. He offered it to me after I told him I was burnt out. He said it had been empty for ages, but still had the basics inside: some dusty cookware, a cast iron stove, a couple of kerosene lanterns, a metal cot, and a pile of chopped wood under the porch. He described it as primitive, but quiet. That was exactly what I needed. I required space. No phones, no screens, no talking, just a few days of genuine silence. The trail started just beyond a narrow gravel pull-off on State Route 216, unmarked by any sign. It immediately disappeared into the woods. After about 10 minutes, I lost cell signal. No bars, no service. Perfect. However, the hike proved to be quite challenging. Jonah had made it sound like a casual walk, but it was all uphill. Switchbacks stacked one on top of another, as if the trail itself was trying to prove something. My pack didn't help matters. It was loaded with food, instant coffee, half a dozen books I never ended up touching, and an overly optimistic little hammock, as if I planned to nap in the woods like some serene forest monk. By the second hour, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't, potentially lost. The trees seemed to press in, as if they'd grown closer since I started, and more than once, I found myself instinctively turning around. Nothing behind me, of course, just quiet. Not even birds by that point. My shirt was stuck to my back. I was certain I'd gone too far when the trail finally emerged onto a flat shoulder. And there it was. The cabin looked like it was leaning into the mountain, but it was still intact. A single room with a roof patched here and there, windows clouded with grime. The kind of place that smells like old nails and forgotten metal. Inside, it was dim but dry. The stovepipe looked sturdy, and the lanterns still held a bit of fuel. I unpacked, cooked rice and beans on the stove, and sat there barefoot, stretching my legs out, watching the lantern cast jerky shadows on the walls. That first night, I slept a strangely hard sleep. The cot wasn't comfortable by any stretch, but I was so completely drained from the hike that I didn't care. What really bothered me, though, was the dark. Not just the absence of light, but a kind of dark that made you doubt your own eyes. No glow under the door, no hint of the horizon. Just this thick, cold blackness, as if the world outside the walls had ceased to exist. I woke feeling jittery the next morning, not exactly scared, just restless. I ate oatmeal from the pot and stared out the window for a bit before deciding to explore the area. I'd noticed what looked like an old, overgrown trail on the way in. A narrow break in the trees leading down the ridge. It turned out to be a logging road, possibly used back in the 70s. The dirt was cracked and sunken, but the path was still discernible if you looked closely. I followed it. About an hour in, I noticed something unusual. Fresh mud and deep boot prints, clearly recent, heading downhill. They weren't mine. The tread pattern was different, boxy and symmetrical like work boots. The edges were clean too. Someone had definitely passed through recently, perhaps within the last day, maybe less. For a second, I felt a strange kind of relief. I wasn't completely alone. Maybe it was a hunter. Maybe someone who knew the area better than I did. But then I noticed something odd. The prints weren't heading up toward the cabin. They were going down into the deeper woods. No sign of turning back. No cross prints or scuffs. Just a straight line, as if someone was walking purposefully into nothing. No road down there. No houses. Just dense forest. I don't know what made me follow. Boredom? Curiosity? Probably both. I wasn't expecting anything more than maybe finding an old camp. Instead, the trail dropped sharply and led into a shallow gully hidden by a tangle of vines. That's where I saw it. A narrow opening in the rock face. A cave mouth no taller than a person, maybe 3 feet wide, almost perfectly vertical. Cold air poured out of it steadily, carrying the wet stone smell of a basement that's never dried. I stood there just listening. No wind, no bugs, no birds, just silence. Even the leaves were still. And the boot prints, they stopped right at the entrance. No smudges on the edge, no dragging of the heel, as if whoever had walked down there had stood there looking at it and then simply vanished. I didn't go in, not even close. I backed up, slowly, keeping my eyes on the cave, and didn't turn around until I was climbing out of the gully. I didn't like the feeling of the air down there, like it was pressing inwards. Back at the cabin, I tried to rationalize it. Probably just an old mine or a root cellar long forgotten. Still, I triple-locked the door that night. I didn't sleep through the night. Sometime just before dawn, I woke needing to use the restroom. I reached for the lantern, then changed my mind. Figured I'd just step outside quickly instead of filling the space with kerosene fumes. I stepped out barefoot into the cold. That's when I heard it. From the tree line no more than 30 or 40 feet away, something screamed, high-pitched at first like metal tearing. Then it dropped into a long, wet growl. It sounded like pain itself had a voice. The sound stopped abruptly, just cut off. I couldn't move. Then I bolted back inside, slammed the door, fumbled with the latch, and practically collapsed onto the cot. My legs were trembling so hard I knocked over the empty pot by the stove. I sat there in the dark, holding my boots in my lap, staring at the door as if something might start turning the knob. When the sun finally came up, I circled the cabin, and that's when I saw the prints. Bare feet, human-shaped, but off, too wide, toes spaced too far apart, and every step sunk deep, as if whoever or whatever left them had considerable weight. They came from the woods, curved around the porch, and then disappeared back into the trees. I didn't pack. I should have, but I didn't. I spent the day pretending I was fine, scrubbing the already clean pan, refolding my clothes, reorganizing my pack, telling myself it was probably just some rare animal. Bobcats scream, right? Foxes too. I repeated that like a mantra, but I couldn't shake the image of those wide toes pressed into the earth. That night, I didn't even bother lying down. I just sat at the edge of the cot, waiting, watching the unlit lantern, listening. It came just past midnight, a sound that slammed through the cabin, not outside, but through it, as if some massive machine buried beneath the ground had suddenly started tearing itself open. It was metal on metal, loud enough to rattle the glass, in the lantern, loud enough to make the nails in the wall creak. I could feel it in my chest, like pressure instead of sound. And outside, chaos. Birds screaming, wings flapping. The whole forest seemed to be flailing. Then it stopped. The silence that dropped next felt even sharper, like the world had been vacuumed out. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. The second the sky started to lighten, I began throwing things into my bag. Didn't fold, didn't check. I left a whole unopened can of beans in the sink. I just had to leave. On the trail back, I passed the spot where I'd first seen the boot prints. They were gone. In their place were more of those barefoot impressions, wide, toe spread, deep, heading straight down toward the gully, toward the cave. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe until I saw my car. My legs were burning, my lungs raw, but I didn't care. I was 31 when I decided to hike that loop alone. It wasn't some life-altering spiritual journey, nothing like that. I just had a few days off and wanted to get off the grid. No emails, no traffic, no conversations. I located a trail cutting through a less-known section of Appalachian backcountry. Barely marked, barely maintained, but still legitimate enough to appear on topographical maps. I liked that about it. Less noise, fewer people, a direct route to a high plateau, then down to a river bend where I planned to camp for night 2. Simple enough. The people I started with, a couple of guys I met at the trailhead, just exchanged pleasantries while stretching, turned back after a few miles, saying they didn't like the feel of the trail. One of them, Carl or Clark, said it was too quiet. He laughed as if it were a joke, but they both turned off before the incline even started. I wasn't bothered. I had come for the quiet. That first day wasn't difficult, but something felt strange about my pack. I'd packed light, really light. Tent, spare clothes, compact stove, meals, emergency gear, the usual. But it felt like I was hauling bricks. The straps dug in deeper than normal. Twice I stopped to check, thinking maybe I'd left a bottle filled. Everything seemed fine, but it still felt wrong. I reached the ridge just before dusk. The sun was setting behind the trees. Maybe 20 minutes of light remained. The clearing wasn't special, kind of plain, flat dirt ringed by trunks and roots, the type of spot you might miss unless you were looking. But faint fire pits and old scorch marks showed someone had camped there before. I pitched the tent quickly. I've done it so many times I could set it up blindfolded. Threw the stove out, boiled water, poured it into chili mac, ate leaning back against a log as the fire sank to a low glow. I remember that part clearly, how quiet it was. Total stillness, no wind, no buzzing insects, just the soft crackle of fire and my own chewing. It didn't even strike me as odd. I just thought, this is the quiet I came for. Dinner done, pouch, rinsed, cookware placed by the fire ring. I crawled into the tent and zipped the flap. My body aching, but calm. Mind unwinding like it always does after a long day outside. The first noise barely registered. A soft rustle in the brush, maybe. 30 ft out. You always hear things in the woods. Probably a fox, deer, bird. I wasn't tense, just adjusted my bag. Told myself I'd be out soon. Then the second sound, louder, closer. A twig snapped to my left. I raised my head. Another sound. This time behind me, like something circling, not fast, just steady shifting position. Always outside the tent, always just far enough to stay hidden. I held still, breathing shallow. The steps weren't random, not frantic animal movements. They moved with purpose. Pause, reposition, move again. I told myself maybe it was two animals crossing paths, but it felt wrong. After a few minutes, the movement stopped. Silence returned, heavy. Then the wall of the tent, right where my head rested, pressed inward. I froze. My scalp felt tight. The fabric curved in just slightly like a fingertip pressing through. It dragged down slowly, settling into the dirt, then vanished. I didn't breathe until it was gone. Heart pounding. I stared at the ceiling. Maybe the wind, I thought. A low gust. Some shift in air pressure. Maybe. Then it pressed again. Other, side behind me. Same slow drag, same deliberate line. That was enough. I sat up, snapped on my flashlight, unzipped the tent in one hard pull. The beam cut across the clearing. Nothing but trunks and ash. My pot gleamed beside dead coals. No movement, no breath of wind, just trees close and still. I stepped out, barefoot, dirt cold under me, skin crawling. I told myself I had to see something, anything, but there was nothing. No eyes reflecting light, no steps, not even a swaying branch. I swept the beam back and forth again and again, heart thudding, palms slick on the handle. Stayed out longer than I needed to. Finally forced myself back in. I didn't lie down. Sat upright, light on my lap, backpack pressed to my hip. Minutes passed, an hour. My eyes drooped, not from calm, but adrenaline fatigue. Body giving out while my brain screamed to stay awake. Then the flap pressed in. Front entrance this time. No sneak, just a bold, steady lean. Weight against the tent. Someone standing inches away. I didn't scream. I lunged forward, punched the wall hard where the pressure was. It vanished. No sound, no retreating steps, just gone. That was it. No, more thinking, just action. I ripped through the tent, grabbed what I could bag, stove, half a layer, and crammed it in. No rolling, no folding. My hands shook too much to buckle the top. I yanked the stakes free, tore the fly off, left, the poles standing. Then I walked fast, too fast. I knew I'd trip on switchbacks, but I didn't care. Headlamp bouncing across rocks and roots, straps flapping. Every turn felt like it might reveal something ahead. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. Halfway, down. One last sound. A branch snapping close, sharp like someone shifting weight behind me. Real. I pushed harder, lungs burning, socks bunched in boots. Didn't matter. I didn't stop, not until the trail leveled out and I stepped onto gravel. Ranger station ahead. Porch light a dull orange through the trees. That was the moment I felt safe. I didn't report it. What would I say? The trees leaned too close. Something moved too, smoothly. Pressure on fabric means something's out there. No one would believe me. Hell, I don't know if I believe me, but I left that tent up there and I never went back for it. My friend Brian had been nudging me for years, constantly trying to get me to join him on one of his Appalachian backpacking trips. He's the kind who gets genuinely excited over topo maps and carries bear spray just in case. It's practically part of his personality. Every time he returned from one of those solo treks, he had some strange story to share. Tales about dilapidated cabins that weren't on any map, voices coming from nowhere, or encounters with people who seemed to live out there full time. He always presented it like a mix of survival challenge and ghost story. For a while, I dismissed it all. Hiking, to me, meant a stroll around the neighborhood, or maybe a weekend loop trail with an iced coffee afterwards. Not this deep woods, vanish from GPS kind of thing he was so keen on. But eventually, after enough beers and persistent pestering, I agreed. He told me we wouldn't be using any of the popular trails. If you want to understand the real trail, he said, you have to get away from where the Boy Scouts and Instagrammers go. We left on a Friday morning in October. The air was cool and dry, and the trees were just beginning to show their fall colors. He chose a trailhead a few hours out from a tiny place called Whitlow Gap, a town with one diner and no cell signal once you passed it. We parked near a gravel turnout, locked the car, and shouldered our packs. I had 3 days' food, which already felt optimistic. He packed 4 days' worth, just in case. That should have been a warning sign. We didn't see another person after the first hour. Honestly, I liked that part initially. The silence felt strange, but refreshing. No engines, no leaf blowers, just the crunch of our boots, the creak of tree limbs, the occasional snap of a twig. The trail started out well marked, but it grew faint the deeper we went. At one point, we crossed a crumbling stone bridge over a dry creek bed, and from there, it felt like we weren't on a trail at all. Brian didn't seem bothered. "This is how you know you're close to something good," he said. We pushed into a pocket of dense timber that looked untouched for decades. I could barely make out a path. It felt more like instinct guiding us than any official trail. I asked if this was still on the map. He just smiled, tapped his head, and said, "Better than GPS." By the time we stopped to make camp, I was ready to be done. The clearing we found was about the size of a backyard, ringed by huge oaks and poplars. The ground felt strange, lumpy and uneven, as if something had been buried there. In some spots, the earth felt soft, almost spongy. I asked if the spot was safe. Brian glanced around and said, "Yeah, this place is perfect." I didn't love it. The way the trees arched overhead felt claustrophobic, but he was already unrolling his sleeping pad, and I wasn't in the mood for an argument. We set up the tent. Then he went to refill water from a spring, and I started gathering firewood. He was gone a long time, too long. Just as I was about to go look for him, he returned, quietly. Something was off. When I asked if he was all right, he hesitated. Then he said he'd found something strange. He'd gone further past the spring, maybe another few hundred yards, and come across an old chimney just standing there. No walls, no house, no foundation, just an 8-foot chimney, blackened by smoke, alone in the woods. I asked if he'd taken a photo. He shook his head. "Didn't feel right sticking around," he said. That detail stuck with me. We cooked dinner, freeze-dried beef stew and instant potatoes. He tried to act normal, cracking jokes, asking if I could still feel my legs. I played along, but both of us kept glancing towards the tree line. Later, we passed a flask back and forth, letting the fire die down. Eventually, the tension eased. The night even felt pleasant. Stars were faint through the canopy. The firelight flickered, and there was the occasional branch snapping in the distance. Nothing ominous. Not yet. Finally, I crawled into the tent. Brian said he'd stay up by the fire for a bit longer. I rolled into my sleeping bag, warm and tired, and started to drift off. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the fact that I couldn't move. It happened instantly. One moment, I was asleep. The next, I was staring at the tent wall, completely paralyzed, arms pinned, legs locked, chest heavy, as if someone had strapped me down. I'd heard of sleep paralysis before, and that's what I told myself it was, until I noticed the figure. Through the mesh of the tent, dimly lit by the dying fire, someone was standing, perfectly still. At first I thought it was Brian, but I knew it wasn't. The figure was taller, broader, and it held itself with an unnatural stillness, as if it had been placed there to watch. I tried to speak, but only a harsh rasp came out. My eyes flicked towards the fire. Brian was still there, slumped forward, hands by his knees, staring into the embers. The figure moved. It didn't walk. It glided. 1 second, it was 10 feet away. The next, it was right at the tent. No sound, no crunch of leaves, just distance covered in silence. Its outline pressed against the mesh. Head, shoulders, arms, just black. A void that swallowed light. The weight on my chest intensified, as if it was pushing into me, as if it wanted inside. The tent fabric bowed inward, but made no sound. Then it leaned in. Or perhaps it didn't move at all. Maybe it just exerted pressure, rolling over me. I felt it sink into my skin, into my breath, like I was inhaling it, like it was filling me. I wanted to scream. I tried, but the only sound was the strained wheeze of my lungs, and then nothing. It vanished. The weight lifted. I shot upright, gasping, throat burning. I ripped open the tent flap and fell into the cold dirt outside, heart pounding. Brian jumped up, startled. He stared at me as if I were insane. I asked if he'd been near the tent, if he'd seen anything, heard anything. He swore he hadn't moved, said I'd been quiet until the moment I'd apparently screamed. I checked my watch. 2:04 a.m. The woods were silent. That kind of silence that feels like something is listening. We didn't sleep again. I sat by the fire, clutching my water bottle, while Brian sat next to me, clearly shaken. We barely spoke, just waited for dawn. When the sky finally lightened, I told him I wanted to leave. He argued gently, said it was probably just a dream, that we hadn't even reached the best part of the trail. But then he looked at my face and stopped. We quickly tore down camp. No breakfast, no coffee, just took the tent down and left. The further we got from that clearing, the easier it was to breathe. Like something had released its grip. We didn't speak for the entire hike back. When we reached the car, I got in without looking back. Brian shut his door, sat there for a moment, then started the engine. He still teases me sometimes, saying I bailed on the best part, but he's never once mentioned the chimney again. Not once, and I've never asked. It's been 5 years. I've never gone back to the Appalachians, haven't even glanced at that section of the map. I was 19 years old when I decided to camp solo in the Bellwood Mountains. I imagined it would be the ultimate test of independence. My parents always came along on hikes when I was younger. They hovered, checked my gear twice, reminded me not to push too far. I was tired of the oversight, tired of feeling small and undermined. I wanted to prove, mostly to myself, that I could handle the wild without backup. No cell service, no check-in calls, just me and the trees. I planned everything, carefully. The tent was a second-hand 2-person dome, light enough to carry, heavy enough to feel solid on the ground. I packed a sleeping bag, rated for cool nights, a tiny propane stove, and just enough dried pasta and oatmeal for a long weekend. My trail map was covered in bright pen strokes marking loop routes, stream crossings, and elevation changes. I carried a compass as a backup, and I even marked a shelter spot in case of bad weather. Still, I joked to myself that the tent would do fine. I set out from a gravel lot at Red Pine Trail, shouldered my pack, and hiked until all I heard was the scrape of boots on leaves and the distant babble of a stream. I found a flat clearing near the water. I pitched my tent on the north side of a sturdy pine and laid everything out precisely, pack against the tree, shoes neatly side by side. Dinner was simple pasta with dehydrated sauce. To be honest, it tasted better than I remembered. Day 1 ended quietly. Eat, prepare the sleeping bag, drift off. Day 2, I woke early, still groggy, and brushed my teeth with snowmelt from a rock. The cold water tasted sweet, crisp, clean. I paused just to savor it. I packed a light lunch, granola, cheese, an apple, and followed the stream uphill. The forest thickened with chest-high ferns and tricky roots. I pushed through brush where birds scattered with soft flutters, then rejoined an old logging trail. The smell of bark, the feel of pine needles underfoot, it all registered. I realized I was enjoying the solitude more than I expected. Not afraid, just aware of every step. Back at camp, I made mac and cheese, read from a worn paperback, then turned in early. Before sleep, I listened to crickets and the night wind whispering through branches. But around midnight, I woke to something subtle. Something brushed along the tent wall, soft and shivering, like bare fingers dragging over nylon. My heart gave a confused beat. I held my breath. I ran through the possibilities. Raccoon, maybe a bear sniffing, maybe just wind against a branch. The second touch, longer. I unzipped slowly, headlamp ready. Nothing, only foliage and darkness. No tracks, no shine of eyes. I zipped it shut, steadied my breath, and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I packed carefully, checked everything, then headed deeper into the woods. About an hour in, I saw an unmarked trail, too straight to be random, too worn to be forgotten. It wasn't on my map, but I followed it anyway. Pure curiosity. At the end was a clearing. A fire pit sat in the center, stones arranged in a nearly perfect ring. The ashes were cold, but compacted, fresh, though not smoking. The stones looked placed with intent, as if someone measured out order and symmetry. I stared longer than I should have, trying to find a normal explanation. A scout group, a ritual site, or just someone who liked neat circles. I shook it off and walked back faster than before. Later, something felt off. My day pack wasn't where I'd left it. It had shifted closer to the tent. One shoe was upside down, laces loose as if half untied. I tried to remember. Was I that careless after dark? The forest felt sharper, heavier. I propped a stick across the tent flap as a makeshift alarm and lay awake. Sometime after midnight, the stick cracked. I shot upright, flashlight in hand. The zipper was closed, but slightly skewed. My pack was half outside, its handle brushing. The dirt. Adrenaline burned in my chest. I yanked it inside, gripped it tight, and kept my knife in my palm until dawn. By morning, I didn't hesitate. I packed fast, ready to leave. Still, I felt that pull of morbid curiosity. I returned to the clearing one last time, as if tying off a loose thread, the same crunch of boots on the same trail. But when I reached the clearing, the fire pit was gone. In its place were structures, twig and branch constructions woven and balanced. One like a miniature ladder, another like a cage too small for anything real, and one like a tiny gate suspended in air. It wasn't random. It wasn't playful, it was deliberate. Then I froze. Bare footprints in the soil. My footprints, but not mine. Perfect replicas trailing my path. Same corners, same pauses. They ended right beside me. My skin felt paper thin. I didn't linger. I grabbed my pack and rushed back. The forest seemed to flip around me, heartbeat in my ears, leaves brushing, air trembling. I forced steady strides, ready to sprint. All I wanted was the car, the noise, the normal. At the gravel lot, I slammed the door and locked it before the key even hit the ignition. My hands shook so hard the steering wheel jolted between breaths. I drove until my phone lit up with signal, but I didn't call anyone. What would I say? Somebody moved my gear, built twig art, copied my footprints. I'd sound unhinged, so I just drove home and I've never gone back since. That summer, I had a seasonal maintenance job way out in the Appalachian Mountains. My friend Jasper had landed a contract to maintain a collection of old cabins scattered across the hills. Some were so remote they didn't even show up properly on GPS. He needed an extra pair of hands, and I needed rent money, so we made a deal. He handled the scheduling and paperwork. I did the manual labor, and I covered the long drives. The work itself was decent, not physically grueling, mostly just time-consuming. Much of it was routine. Drive to each cabin, check the locks, clear away fallen branches or leaves, fix a loose board or a sagging step. Occasionally, there'd be a broken window or signs of Someone camping without permission, but nothing dangerous. The real challenge was the driving. It could take 3 or 4 hours to get from one location to another. Some of the roads were barely more than deer trails, dirt and tire tracks, weaving between trees with cliffs on one side and steep drop-offs on the other. Half the time, my phone showed no service from the moment I turned off the main road until I returned. Most of the cabins were forgettable. You arrive, run through the checklist, maybe take a photo if something needed repair, then move on. But one week, I noticed a name on the maintenance list that was unfamiliar: McBride Hollow. It was written in smaller print than the others, almost like it had been added last minute. No notes, no repair orders, just the name paired with a vague set of directions. I even asked Jasper about it the night before. He just shrugged and said, "Should be fine, but if anything's weird, skip it and let me know." Famous last words. By the time I actually reached McBride Hollow, the sun was setting behind the ridge line. I remember glancing at the clock and thinking I'd miscalculated the timing. I didn't like starting at a new location with barely any daylight left, especially one this deep in the woods. The path leading to McBride Hollow was barely a road, just 2 ruts in the dirt that snaked up the side of a hill. The truck bounced and rocked the entire way, and I kept waiting for the sound of a tire popping. My hands were clenched so tight. On the wheel, my knuckles hurt. Eventually, the trees thinned into a clearing, and the cabin came into view. It didn't look totally abandoned, but it was close. The structure was still standing, but the wood had that faded, splintery grey hue from sitting too long outdoors. The roof sagged in the middle. Half the porch railing was either missing or dangling loosely. Grass and weeds had grown tall and dry around the base of the steps, brushing against the boards as if trying to reclaim the place. There was a wooden sign nailed to a post near the steps. The letters were carved roughly, uneven, but still readable: McBride Hollow. I cut the engine and sat there staring. There was no wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Just this heavy, still quiet that felt wrong. Not the usual quiet of the woods. It felt intentional, as if the whole place was holding its breath. I grabbed the maintenance kit and stepped out. The truck door creaked louder than usual when I shut it, and the sound felt unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I walked up, I noticed the front door wasn't even on its hinges. It was propped against the frame, as if someone wanted to give the impression it was secured. Next to it, taped unevenly to the siding, was a piece of paper. The rain had curled the edges, but the writing was still bold and clear in thick black marker. "Check around back." I froze. None of the other cabins ever had anything like this. There were never handwritten notes. Jasper had never mentioned anything. And who exactly was I supposed to be checking in with around back? I stood there for almost 30 seconds, debating whether to turn back. But I'd come all this way. The whole point was to inspect places that hadn't been looked at in a while. I told myself it was probably just a note left for a utility worker or maybe a previous contractor. Nothing sinister. So, I walked around the side. The grass was up to my knees in spots. Branches had partially rotted into the dirt. The back of the cabin looked even worse than the front. The siding was dark with moisture and mold. The door was completely covered in spider webs, big, thick webs, the kind that stick to your face and make you regret every decision that led you there. The doorknob was rusted, streaked with flaky orange corrosion. I hesitated, then knocked once, then, again louder. No answer. I waited, listened. Nothing. One more time. I knocked hard enough that my knuckles stung. Still nothing. I was about to leave, already turning back towards the truck, when I heard it. Voices from inside. Not just one voice, 2, maybe 3. Muffled and fast, like they were arguing right on the other side of the wall. I couldn't make out words, only the sharp, tense rhythm of it. I froze. My body locked in place, but my heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I leaned in, trying to catch a word, a name, anything. Then I heard something else behind me. A slow, steady crunch in the grass. I turned, throat tight. A woman was walking out of the woods, slowly, deliberately, as if she had been there the whole time, just watching. She was older, maybe late 60s. Her hair was long, way too long, grey and blonde strands hanging down to her waist. She wore a stained nightgown, torn along one side, and was barefoot. Her feet were filthy, cracked and bleeding, as if she'd walked miles through thorny brush. She stopped when she saw me. Her expression shifted, confused at first, then alarmed, then hard and angry. She pointed a shaking hand at me. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Oh no, no, no. Honey, you get on. You don't stay here." That's when my body caught up. My chest tightened. The air felt cold, though maybe it wasn't. She stepped forward. Her voice grew louder. "Did you hear me, or are you deaf? Fool child, folks. Come up here." They don't leave. The certainty in her words shut down whatever part of my brain was still trying to reason. I dropped the maintenance box, turned, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if she was following. I just ran, as if my life depended on it, because maybe it did. The truck was 30 feet away, but it felt like forever. My boots slipped in the grass. I slammed into the side of the truck, yanked the door open, and pulled myself inside. Just as I reached for the keys, I heard it, a heavy crash. I turned. The front door, the one that had been propped, was flat on the porch, and someone was emerging from it. A man, older, gaunt. He moved with an awkward limp, but somehow he was fast. He was already across the porch, arms outstretched, yelling, "Stop! Don't you run off! Stop!" His voice was rough, broken, as if he hadn't spoken in years. I jammed the keys in, turned them, floored the gas. The truck roared to life, lurched forward, tires spinning in mud before finally gripping. Branches scraped the sides as I tore down the path. I didn't care. Let them scratch the paint, let them break the windows, just get me out. I didn't ease up until the road flattened out and I saw the faint porch light of a neighboring cabin. Just a flicker, but it felt like a lifeline. Back at the maintenance base, I filled out the report like always. I wrote everything down. What I saw, what I heard, the woman, the man. I didn't tell anyone the rest. I'm 27 years old. The last time I went camping in the Appalachian was the night I realized there are things in the woods I'm not meant to understand, and I've never gone back. The plan was simple, a weekend escape, just a couple of nights off. The grid out where the air actually smells like trees and you can hear your own thoughts. It started with 5 of us in a group chat. We threw out dates, shared gear checklists, and talked as if we were seasoned wilderness types. But as the trip got closer, people started dropping out. First, it was Jackson. His girlfriend had a last-minute work emergency. Then Lex said she couldn't get the time off, and Gabe never replied to the last few texts. In the end, it was just me and Nate. We could have cancelled, but we'd both already taken the time off work, and honestly, the idea of a quieter trip had its own appeal. No crowd, no planning drama, just 2 tents, 1 fire, and miles of woods. We told ourselves it'd be better this way, more relaxing. We pulled off the road sometime late afternoon. The clearing wasn't marked, not officially. Nate had found it, on a backpacking forum, a spot someone had mentioned years ago, probably before the post got buried under newer threads. It was just past a gravel service road where the trees parted enough for 2 tents and some space. No ranger station, no signposts, no one else around. We lost cell service long before we turned off the highway. I checked my phone out of habit, saw the red no signal banner, and stuffed it into the glove box like it was useless. Nate laughed when I did that. "That's the point, man." He said digital detox. We set up camp quickly. I chose the flattest patch of ground near the firing and secured my tent. Nate took the opposite side. We weren't more than 15 FT apart, close enough to talk without shouting. We didn't say much though. Dinner was canned chili, a camp stove, and some beers in a cooler with half-melted ice. It was basic, but it worked. As the sun dipped, shadows stretched longer and deeper between the trees. And that quiet started to feel dense, thick. Not peaceful exactly, just dense, like sound didn't carry quite right. No wind, no birds, just that strange background hum you notice when everything else goes still. The first odd thing happened after dinner. I took the bottles down to the creek to refill. It was maybe 30 or 40 yards down a slope. Easy to see the fire for most of the path. I wasn't gone long. The fire was still flickering steadily when I came back, but Nate's chair was empty. I figured he'd gone to grab something. His car was still, locked, gear untouched. I set the bottles by the fire, stood up, and there he was, sitting again, as if nothing had changed. I actually flinched. It was like my brain skipped a frame or two. He hadn't walked up. I hadn't heard gravel shift under his boots. He was just there staring into the flames. I asked him where he went. He frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I didn't go anywhere." He wasn't joking. His voice had that defensive edge. I let it go, but it sat with me. I knew what I saw, or didn't see. We turned in around 10 p.m. The fire was burning low, and we planned to wake up early to hike. I zipped up my tent, lay back on the sleeping bag, and let the dark settle around me. No moonlight, just the occasional crackle of embers. At some point, I dozed off. Then the sound of a zipper snapped me awake. It was close, right outside my tent. My eyes opened fast. I saw the flap open just a few inches, just enough to peek through. I held my breath and looked across the fire. Nate's tent was zipped shut. No movement, no flashlight, just dark. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing moved. Finally, I zipped my tent all the way. Then I lay back down, wide awake, listening, to silence press in again. It felt like hours before I slept. In the morning, I noticed the boots first. I always leave them just outside my flap, toes pointing out. But now they were at the tree line, upright, perfectly arranged, maybe 20 ft away. The cooler had shifted too. Not dumped, not rummaged, just moved like someone dragged it with care. I looked at Nate. He looked back, eyebrows raised. "You move this stuff?" he asked. I shook my head. "Did you?" He didn't answer, just muttered and kicked dirt over the fire pit. We tried to act normal, made some oatmeal, barely touched it, then packed for a short hike, hoping to shake the weirdness off. The trail was overgrown but visible, winding uphill through pine and brush. Halfway up, we passed a wooden mile marker. To me, that's when we checked the time. Nate's watch said 12:03. My phone, still with no signal, read 9:47. We laughed, but not with amusement. More like we didn't want to deal with the math. Maybe one device was wrong, maybe not. Either way, we turned back sooner than planned. By nightfall, the air felt heavier again, not temperature. Weight, that pressure on your chest, like something was watching from the trees. Nate went to bed early, said he had a headache. I sat by the fire alone, shifting embers, not really thinking. That strange stillness when you can't put your finger on what's wrong. Then I went to bed too. I must have been asleep an hour when Nate screamed my name. I was out of the tent in seconds, barefoot, gravel stabbing my feet. Nate was outside his tent, pale and shaking, pointing at the fire. I looked at the chairs. We'd left them angled out, relaxed and casual. Now they were perfectly aligned, facing each other, almost touching, like two people had pulled them close for a midnight chat. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The fire cracked quietly, but I didn't feel warm. Nate finally whispered, "We didn't do that." We dragged the chairs back, barely making eye contact. Saturday down, we pretended it was nothing. We didn't sleep again. Maybe half an hour later, I noticed them just beyond the firelight in the soft dirt near the trees. Footprints. Bare, small. They led from the woods straight toward my tent and stopped at the flap. That was it for me. I didn't say anything, Just grabbed my bag and started throwing things in. Didn't care if I left something behind. I just needed to move. Nate didn't ask. He was already packing too. We didn't fold the tents, didn't douse the fire, just stuffed what we could in the trunk and got in the car. As we pulled away, the tents were still there, empty, standing, the fire glowing behind us like nothing had happened, but we knew better. My name's Callan. I've done quite a bit of hiking over the years. Not the kind where you snap scenic selfies and head back to the car before sundown. I mean real hiking, the kind where you put your phone away and disappear for a while. Usually, I went with friends, or at least let someone know where I was going, but this time was different. I didn't want company, I didn't want conversation, and I definitely didn't want to be found easily. So, I went solo. I chose a trail in the southern part of the Appalachians, barely marked, barely known, not one of those popular routes with signs and safety rails. This one climbed Hartfield Ridge, then intersected with paths the Forest Service had stopped maintaining years ago. That was the appeal. I wasn't trying to disconnect from the internet. I was trying to get away from everything: people, noise, expectations, even life itself. I packed enough food and water for 2 nights, kept the gear light, tent, stove, first aid kit, and a physical map that was clearly well worn before I even touched it. Still better than trusting GPS out there. The first few hours passed without incident. Just the quiet forest and the sound of my boots on the trail. Nothing but trees and silence. It felt good, almost meditative. Around mid-afternoon, I found a clearing tucked between 2 ridges. It wasn't perfectly flat, but open enough to pitch a tent. The ground was soft, no signs of other campers. I set up the tent, stored my food properly, then took a short walk before dark to stretch my legs. The trail past the clearing had markers on the trees, though they were faded. But something about the spacing bothered me. At first, I couldn't pinpoint it. Then I realized the distance between them seemed off, as if someone had tried to put them up but didn't check the intervals. Or maybe the trees had somehow shifted. It sounds strange, I know, but that's how it felt. I shrugged it off, told myself I was overthinking it, probably just tired. On the way back, however, it took significantly longer than it should have to reach camp. The trail didn't loop. It didn't fork. Yet, every step felt like I was climbing uphill, even on flat ground. I kept checking for familiar landmarks, a specific rock outcropping, a leaning tree, but nothing looked right. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the familiar campsite was there. Same setup, same layout, as if I'd only just arrived. I laughed it off, even though it wasn't funny. Maybe I'd gone the wrong way. Maybe I'd been walking in circles. Easy, enough to do in dense woods. I made a simple hot meal, then crawled into the tent. But I didn't sleep well, couldn't settle down. I kept waking up in brief bursts, as if my brain refused to shut off completely. Something felt off. Sometime after midnight, I went outside. No flashlight, just the pale light filtering through the branches. The fire had died down to ash, but I could still make out the nearby trail. And that's when I saw them. Footprints, bare human, deep enough to clearly show the heels and toes. They weren't mine. I'd been wearing boots all day and hadn't walked barefoot in the camp area. They came down the trail directly towards my tent and stopped about 10 feet away. I froze. My skin grew cold, unrelated to the night air. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the woods, listening intently. Nothing. No wind. No movement. I backed into the tent and zipped it shut, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from anything. I sat up, holding my boots in my lap, eyes fixed on the entrance. Nothing happened. Not a single rustle. Eventually, around dawn, I managed maybe 20 minutes of dozing. That was all I got. When I woke up, I started packing. My hands were shaking, sweat dripped down. Even though the air was cold, Every part of me felt wound tight. I decided to leave anyway. The trip was over, but the way out didn't match the way I'd come in at all. The curves were different. The elevation change felt off. Landmarks were gone. No broken log, no mossy boulder where I'd stopped for lunch the day before. I checked the map, double-checked it, but it didn't help. The trail markers had changed. Some were gone. Others had appeared in spots I was certain they hadn't been before. I tried to stay calm. Worst case, I'd backtrack. At a junction I didn't recognize, I chose the wider path. It looked well-worn, more traveled. I walked for maybe 3 or 4 hours. Then the trail curved, went downhill, and I found myself back in the same clearing where I'd camped. Same angle of sunlight, same scuffed ground. And worst of all, the tent poles were still sticking out of the dirt. I had packed them. I knew I had. But they were there. I didn't curse. Couldn't. My stomach plummeted. I just stood there staring. This place wasn't just confusing. It was changing, rearranging, folding in on itself. I didn't eat, didn't rest. I shoved everything into my pack, crushing some gear, and forced myself to keep moving. Trail or no trail. I walked and walked. No specific direction, just away. And still the footprints followed. Not mine, always barefoot. Sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. By late afternoon, I heard something new. A clinking sound. Metal on rock. Light, distant, steady, like something being dragged in rhythm with footsteps. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I waited. Nothing. I started walking again slowly. It started again. Step, clink, step, clink. It matched me. That broke something inside me. I didn't think. I just ran, sprinting through the trees, ducking under branches, barely watching where I put my feet. I tripped twice. My legs were scraped. My face was wet with sweat and dirt. I didn't care, just kept running. And then, as if the world hit a reset button, I was back in the clearing again. Same spot, same poles, same trampled grass. I dropped to my knees, gasping, unable to breathe. My whole body was shaking. The forest was deathly silent. I pulled out the map, hoping I'd misread it, but it was wrong, skewed. Trails twisted in impossible directions. Some lines didn't connect. Others formed loops that hadn't existed before. I gave up, threw the map in the dirt, tossed half my gear aside. I started forcing my way through the brush. No trail, just trees and undergrowth. Branches whipped my face. Thorns tore at my legs. I stumbled more than I walked, but I didn't stop. I whispered to myself over and over, like a mantra, just keep going. Just keep going. Then the ground changed. The soft forest floor gave way to gravel. I stumbled onto it, completely exhausted. It was a road. I don't know how long I lay there. 5 minutes? Half an hour? Then the light shifted, and I heard a truck. A ranger's vehicle appeared. Mud splattered, real. It slowed down. The driver leaned out the window. "You lost?" he asked, not unkindly, but with suspicion. I tried to answer. Only a choked breath came out. I pointed back towards the woods. "I need to get out." That was all I could manage. He nodded. Didn't ask questions. Just opened the door. The truck rumbled down the mountain. With every mile, I felt something release its hold on me. I never told him what I'd seen.